are talking this wicked cool superhero movie called Samaritan, which has a definite 90s theme, y'all. Yes, we are talking Samaritan. This one is directed by Julius Avery, previously responsible for the World War II movie zombie horror film Overlord. And this one stars Sylvester Stallone. Now, it's a very 90s feeling movie we're going to discuss. But what is the basic premise here? Well, it focuses on this reality which has this superhero. Well, I say has, it had a superhero, and it actually had a supervillain. So, in this particular instance, there was a superhero called Samaritan, a villain called Nemesis, and they kind of struggle for power in the past couple of decades. But they have both disappeared, assumed dead, and now it picks up 20 kind of years later. And we have this young boy who is convinced his neighbour, played by Sylvester Stallone, is in fact Samaritan, just kind of like hiding out and trying to kind of live a normal life. In the meantime, you've got the guy who played Euron Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, causing trouble, threatening to become the new Nemesis with his kind of gang of thugs. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works with this movie. Now, this is a medium budget film, I would suggest. Certainly not a low budget, and it does have a certain level of production value in it. I think this is a very proficiently made movie in a lot of technical aspects. You know, the film is actually framed, shot, the production value, all looks pretty professional and to a good standard here. And I think the main thing that impressed me the most about this movie was actually the stunt work. I think the stunt work here is pretty solid. There are quite a few kind of action sequences and throwdowns between superheroes and bad guys and stuff. And there's lots of kind of wire work, explosions, fight scenes, etc., which I think are done to a good, kind of exaggerated standard to kind of emphasise the fact that we're dealing with superpowered individuals. I thought that was actually kind of quite fun. And I will say, I think Stallone's actually quite good in the role. He's a little understated, and it's not exactly stretching him in regards to acting ability here. But nonetheless, I thought he was actually kind of quite charming as this kind of gruff, rough and ready kind of older guy who may or may not be this kind of retired superhero Samaritan. And the movie actually does have a reasonable kind of reveal at the end. It's somewhat kind of signposted, I will say, but nonetheless, I think it was a pretty good kind of like, not exactly plot twist maybe, but certainly a reveal towards the end of the film. Relatively kind of well paced, and you know, it certainly has this kind of professional sheen about it. I also like, and I'm not going to pronounce his name because it's just, I wouldn't even know where to begin. The guy who played Euron Greyjoy, I thought he was quite good as the kind of the villain. And I actually like, we actually got a little bit of time developing some of his kind of henchmen as well. We actually got a feel of some of their, you know, some of their kind of like personality. And the movie is trying to have a kind of a positive message in regards to, you know, everyone is a mix of kind of like good and bad. It's up to you what you do with it, etc. So it does try to have some kind of like positive messaging in there. So let's talk about maybe what I think doesn't work. So this I found a movie to be certainly a strange tone. It's very much feels like a 90s movie, but it's not set in the 90s, at least I don't think so. Although I did notice some of the technology is old, but not 90s old. So for example, they've got flip camera phones, they have old style kind of TVs and things like this, but it's not old like it would have been in the 90s. You're talking more kind of like, you know, between 2000 and 2010 kind of style kind of technology here. So I wasn't really sure about the kind of when this was supposed to be taking place, but the feel of it is very much a 90s feel of the movie. Now, I would compare this to the DC superhero movie that starred Shaquille O'Neal called Steel. It feels a comparable movie to that, which was made in '97. Obviously, that is a true 90s movie, whilst this one feels like a 90s movie, but it's certainly, I would suggest, the nearest film to it. And part of the reason for this, as I've mentioned, is kind of the tone here. The tone here feels like it's made for younger people. It really feels like a movie that had the kind of like, or younger people in mind, or at least a very unsophisticated audience, a very kind of like basic kind of storytelling with very kind of like broad stereotypes in regards to kind of characters. The characters are played very kind of broad. There's no real complexity to anyone. And again, this was kind of really before I think that it feels like the movies in the 90s, because back then superhero movies were very basic, and they didn't have the kind of the complexity and the kind of the more of their kind of the character work that is now in modern superheroes. So it has this kind of this old-fashioned feel to it, which I don't know was ever really anyone was asking for. Maybe they are. Maybe they've got tired of the kind of the modern era of superhero films and want to go back to a simpler time. But to me, it just feels very, very kind of basic and kind of unsophisticated in many ways. Even just the kind of the storytelling. I mean, these bad guys' plan is to cause anarchy and cause this big blackout and things like this, and our kind of our Aaran Greyjoy is kind of very shouty kind of villain with no real clear end goal about. He just wants to cause chaos for reasons, and it reminds me of his, when you had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles films and they're kind of gangs of youths and things like this. So it's all very kind of like storytelling from kind of yesteryear with very little under the surface, very kind of a basic kind of level of characterization and narrative with not a lot of kind of depth to it. So this movie to me it didn't really have much meat on the bones at the end of the day. The other thing I would say as well is, although this is kind of billed as a Sylvester Stallone film, and he is in it a lot, don't get me wrong, but he isn't the main character. The main character is actually this little boy. The film is actually from his perspective. And, I don't want to kind of rag on a child actor, to be honest with you, unfairly, but if you've ever seen the movie Last Action Hero, that had a kind of a child kind of protagonist, and this kid reminded me of that. A kind of similar kind of like character in some ways, I thought. And if you were not a fan of the character of the little boy in The Last Action Hero, he's a very sort of similar character, and you'll probably feel a similar way to him. And again, I don't mean to be hard, but maybe other child actors may have given a little bit more of a performance here. I feel this little kid wasn't the best, maybe. Sorry, but that's just the way I kind of have to say it. But yeah, his character as well is written to be a little bit of a kind of like, annoying. There's also lots of kind of like inconsistencies and conveniences within the movie. For example, in regards to kind of inconsistencies, we see a scene where Sylvester Stallone's character, who appears that he's got superpowers, is run over by a car, and he is relatively injured by this. He recovers because he's a superhero or has superpowers and things, and that's fine, but it causes damage to him initially. And then we see scenes where he's getting shot like a lot by a variety of different handguns and kind of machine guns and stuff, but it seems to cause zero damage. I'm sorry, but if a car hits you and it kind of messes you up as bad as it did, even though he recovered, guns are going to kind of mess you up, especially fired at kind of such a short range. It just is very kind of inconsistent, and again, it's that lack of sophistication and things like this. It's just a basic kind of storytelling. Oh, don't worry about the kind of the details. It's just a basic kind of silly superhero movies. No one's going to care about these kind of things. That's the attitude behind it, I feel. And then we have all these kind of conveniences. The kid always seems to be kind of in available in these sort of areas, or in the time where it's certain plot things happen and the kid witnesses, or he happens to be near a kind of a certain object that is essential for the kind of the plot to move forward. Lots of kind of conveniences like this. So again, it just feels like a very, very basic and kind of like very little effort has been put into this movie. When I first heard about this film, I was expecting it to be kind of like more of a gritty sort of deconstruction of the kind of the superhero genre, because we've had so much of it at this point. A bit like kind of The Boys or something like that, but it really isn't. It's a pure throwback movie to the kind of the 90s. And as I've said, the movie is primarily from this kid's point of view. So, the movie fools you into thinking it's a Stallone movie. And like I say, he is in the movie a lot, but there are long periods where Stallone isn't in the film. and he only kind of comes in when, you know, basically the kind of the action scenes are there, or kind of there's like a few different kind of like little scenes of character building, but there's not a lot of, not as much maybe as you would expect. It's not like this movie is like, you know, Cobra or Rambo. It's not, he isn't kind of the main driving force of this film, and although I think Stallone does a reasonable job here, the role isn't exactly stretching him. It's a very kind of basically kind of written role, with the exception of like this reveal kind of late in the kind of the third act. I think there's no real depth to this movie whatsoever. It's a nice looking film. It's kind of well made. There's lots of kind of action sequences, and it's a basic kind of like superhero film. Some people may enjoy it, but it's a kind of a narrative. I just found it a little on the weaker side here. But purely because I think the movie is proficiently made. I can't necessarily say it's a bad film, but it is a below average film in my opinion. So by that metric, I'm going to have to give it a below average score of a 4 out of 10. Still watchable if you are kind of undemanding and you want some basic kind of superhero movie action. Anyway, have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.